Hi, today I am getting my review of the book A Planet of Blood and Ice by A.J. Hartley. This is the first book in the Cathedrals of Glass trilogy. I know the second book is out and I have not heard anything yet about the third book, so maybe that will come out someday. I just know that it being a trilogy was the plan. So this is the fifth book I have read by A.J. Hartley, and I have always enjoyed his work so far. So even though the premise of this book, when I looked it up, sounded a little bit intimidating, I had hope that he would make it good. I had hope that he would make these somewhat complicated sounding topics sound understandable to us. And I had hope that he would make it a fun, interesting story with good characters. So I trusted that he would make it good. And I think that he did. I thought this was pretty good. Now I'm going to tell you what it was about. So this is young adult. It is considered science fiction, but it is very dystopian as well. And I think it could also be considered a thriller to some extent. This book is about a group of 10 teenagers who were put on a ship, and that ship was supposed to go to a moon called Jerem. Because these teenagers have all broken behavioral law, they are all deviants, they have done something that was wrong, and on the moon is a re-education facility, so they're supposed to go there, but they never end up at that moon. They end up crash landing on a planet. I think I said in my July haul that on the cover was a moon. It kind of looks like it, but no, it is a planet. They end up on this planet called Valkyries. I'm not sure how that's pronounced exactly, but they end up on there, and that's a planet that they all know about. They've all learned about it at home. They're not very happy that they've landed there. They're very devastated because they've been taught, keyword taught, that the planet is unsustainable for life and that it is uninhabited. So they are not quite sure how they're going to survive on it. The main character is a teenage girl named Sola. She was supposed to be sent to the re-education facility for being a roamer. She would often leave her home in the middle of the night, past a certain time when you were supposed to be out, and she would just walk around, and she felt free when she did that, and she didn't feel very confined. But she did that one too many times, and so she was put with these other teenagers who were meant to go to this re-education facility. And at the beginning, you don't know why any of the others are on their way to the place as well. And Sola does not know any of these other people. They're not like her classmates at school. She doesn't know any of them. She's meeting them all for the first time at the beginning. So this book is about them trying to survive on this planet while they're waiting to be rescued. If they're going to be rescued, they're not sure at this point. And they explore the planet and learn things about it and about themselves. And it's quite a stressful and interesting situation for them, not only because they've crash landed on a planet they weren't supposed to go to, that they've been taught is dangerous, but also because this is a really unusual situation for them, meaning being in this ship together, kind of cramped. They're not used to being so close to each other in person, because on home, it takes place at least a few hundred years in the future. It doesn't give a specific year, but there's one thing they talked about regarding animals, and it said something like 300 to 400 years ago, people kept animals as pets, something like that. So it is definitely sometime in the future, and that's where the dystopian aspect really comes in. They do a lot of things digitally. They have school digitally. They don't interact much in person with people. I mean, sometimes they do meet people in person, but a lot of the things they do are very digital. So for them to be in person, where their compads, which are basically like phones, tablets, are not working, they can't get a signal on them, it's quite uncomfortable, and they're not used to being so close to people for such a long period of time. That's not what it's like on their home. So this book only has one first-person perspective throughout the whole book, and that is the perspective of Sola. That's pretty different from A.J. Hartley's other books I've read, as they are typically in third person. Well, one of them had multiple POVs and one of them was first person, but this is the first book of his I've read that only had one point of view, so that was different. But I liked it. I thought it was nice to follow just one character. I don't mind multiple POVs at all, but I think it can be nice to just follow one person throughout the whole book. So as I said, I enjoyed this. I thought this was an interesting story, an interesting premise, and an interesting world that they lived in at this time in the future. I enjoyed learning more about how their world worked. I was curious about how certain things worked. A lot of things are explained, like how their food works and their education and things like that as you go, not all at once, all at the beginning. I think the world building is done as it becomes relevant. By the time you're learning that information, you, or at least I, was interested in learning those things. I also enjoyed the setting of the planet Valkyries. I always enjoy snowy and icy settings, and the planet is definitely very snowy and icy. There are definitely some mysteries in this, and so I thought those were interesting, especially when it came to Sola and how she interacted with people and how other people interacted with her. The characters are experiencing some weird thing where they can like sense each other's thoughts, and they're not quite sure how it works or why it's happening. It wasn't really like that when they were at home. So that's interesting, and that's definitely a big part of this. As I said, it's very dystopian. There are certain aspects of this where I could definitely see our own society becoming like this. I thought it was very reflective of our society. The characters have mottos that they were taught at home that they often repeat, certain phrases that have really been drilled into them, such as deviance is unattractive and jeopardizes all we hold dear. They repeated it enough that I can remember it without having to look at them on the back of the book, and things like home looks after its own and no contrary position is viable. There are certain things that are normal to us now that are considered old-fashioned to them when it comes to clothes or technology or just certain behaviors. But some of the characters actually do have some knowledge about old-fashioned things, especially Sola. They do have movies, which to them are called flicks with a K, F-L-I-K-S. So from things like the old flicks and stuff, they have, Sola, for example, has learned about animals, and they do learn about some old things. So some of them do have some knowledge about old-fashioned things. They're not really taught history, so some people are still interested in it, but it's not really something that they are taught at home. But some of the characters are interested in those old-fashioned things like painting, or sewing, or handwriting poetry. But it's not really something that they feel proud of. They feel ashamed of it because it's just not normal where they live. So as they are away from home, though, they think about it more and really start to work on those things more. By the way, this was published in 2017, so I thought the author did a great job at showing you how the world works. This is science fiction, and I know that some people are intimidated by science fiction and they can find it really confusing or boring. That's how I often find it, but the science fiction books I have read by this author, I did not feel that way about. I feel like it's not super confusing. There are some things that you may not know much about, like, for example, the terminology of the ship. Could I tell you what a gangway is? Not really. But there are terms of the ship talked about because they are on the ship for a lot of this. And there is also just the futuristic aspect of this. But I wouldn't say it's extremely science fiction. I don't think that it is super confusing or hard to understand. So I think that there are a lot of interesting things about the way their world works, but now that they have crashed on this planet, things are very different for them and they're getting used to that. And as I said, Sola knows a lot of things about the past and how things were. And all these teenagers are deviants. These are what they are not supposed to be like and behave like. They behave in ways that they are not supposed to behave in according to whoever is in control at home. But they all also have that in common. They are all deviants. I liked and cared about the characters. I was interested in them and their situation that they were in. I think this author is good at writing characters that you find interesting and care about and that you enjoy reading about. This kind of situation is one where you don't really know who to trust, not only because of the weird things going on with the planet and to do with their trip, but also because, like I said, they are deviants. So some of them are not as nice as some of the others, and some of them develop strange behaviors. I think this author is good at describing things, whether it's an object, a landscape, feelings and emotions, and helping you feel like you're feeling them too. I think he's also good at describing senses. And like I said, good with emotions, good at describing them, helping you understand how the characters feel. I felt that the writing is clever at times and easy to follow along with, though I will say I feel that A.J. Hartley's writing style is not the easiest, most simple to follow along with. It's not like super complicated, but I do feel like he can often do a lot of run-on sentences, and sometimes it can feel a bit convoluted. Sometimes there are words that I don't know, but of course that's fine. It's fine to learn new words. I'm just saying it's not the easiest, but it also isn't super difficult. I feel like he handles topics that we aren't as familiar with in approachable ways, and I definitely thought the story was still good. I just can have trouble sometimes imagining things, especially when like a landscape or something is described in great detail, so that can take me a while to really focus on and think about and imagine. I did find this an interesting story, but I think it had some really interesting ideas as well that really made me think and reflect. on our own society and how we live and the choices that I make. I think this story is about important and relevant things. I think it's about learning to think for yourself. Science fiction is not my favorite genre by far. It's probably my least favorite genre, but I do still read and watch it. So some of the aspects of this story I did not find super interesting. Most of it I did, but some of it wasn't as interesting to me. So I guess there was just a tiny bit of this that wasn't super interesting, but I'd say most of it was. But that's just my preference. That doesn't mean it's a bad story. I don't think it was very confusing, maybe only a little bit, and still ultimately a good story. This author has a lot of experience writing thrillers, and I think this book very much reads like that kind of book, where a lot of chapters end on a cliffhanger and may make you want to read the next chapter right away. This book is about many things, including consciousness, souls, technology, and human nature, and history. So I wanted to talk about how easy it is to keep up with the characters, because you're following these 10 different characters who are all on the ship at the beginning, so you're not introduced to them all at once, all in the same chapter. I know that being introduced to a bunch of characters at once can be confusing and overwhelming for some readers, especially if you can't tell who's who, can't tell what's going on. I think that characters were introduced decently, definitely not all at once, but it doesn't take very long to get to know them all, at least to hear all their names, but it's not all like in the first chapter. And I think that all or most of the characters have some sort of defining physical trait or personality trait that can help you remember who's who, or something that they did early on in the book and you can be like, yeah, that's the one that did that. But I don't feel that they're one-dimensional. I don't mean that they're simply just the girl with the orange hair or the boy with the broken arm, which are some actual examples from this book. But I'm saying that because of things like that, I feel it was I think it was easy for the most part to follow along with who was who. I won't say that it was extremely easy for me. You know, there are 10 of them, so it is a lot, and I wouldn't say that I was never confused. I was a little sometimes, but it didn't, for me, feel like it was all over the place and too confusing. I think the author did a decent job with it. I thought a lot of the characters were interesting. I didn't think that they were like extremely well developed. Well, some more than others. Like the main character, yeah, definitely, and then some of the others. But then it is also just from her perspective, and she doesn't know the others super well. I mean, some of them she gets to know better than others. So I thought that it was not completely easy to keep up with who is who, but it was not too hard, and I think that it became easier as the book went on. I definitely would like to read the sequel, Valkyrie's Wakes. I don't own the book yet, but I'll get it at some point. I would love to. I'm curious about what would happen next, especially the way this book ended. I would like to see what happens next with these characters. I gave this book 5 stars. It was not my favorite book of his authors, though I have given all of his books I've read so far 5 stars. But it was still pretty good, and I think that it was really relevant, but besides that, it was still an interesting story. If you've read this book or anything by this author, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I thought this was a good start to the series, and I am definitely looking forward to reading the rest. I'm certainly invested, and thank you for watching.